Hi everyone, Slowly here. In this video, I'm bringing you the Cluster Arrow build guide for farming Great Rifts. And this build is one of the best builds for Season 26 in terms of farming Great Rifts, both in terms of how high you can farm, but also in terms of speed. And this is one of my most used builds in the entire game, and it's also the build I used to get World First Tier 150 in Season 25. So the potential, the scaling for this build is just absolutely insane. It's also really fun and easy and quick build to make, and it's gonna be even better here in Season 26 because we're getting this as our starter build. And I guarantee you're gonna want to make this build as soon as you can with that season journey, because even with just the basic set, even just the basic gear from the season journey, you're gonna be able to farm tier 90s straight away. Just get this build up and running, even with non-ancients, and you'll be blasting in no time. And the build will just keep scaling. The more gear and the more augments, the more paragon you get. So it's a very simple playstyle. Basically comes down to using your sentries. You want to always make sure you have 5 sentries down on each map. So when you go to a new floor, quickly place sentries. And the good thing about this build is that the sentries will keep firing as long as they're within line of sight. You can have sentries firing from basically all the way from the entrance of the map and keep firing until where you are now, and just destroying everything. Besides that, we're using our Evasive Fire to keep focus and restraint and Rats of Clarity up. We're using our Vault Tumble to get around the map quicker, look for elites, basically just move around. Wolf Companion and Vengeance, just cooldowns to keep up all the time. And then we're just using our Cluster as much as humanly possible to squeeze out as much damage as possible. And once you get familiar with the build enough, you can speed farm 110s in just 2 minutes or so. Now I've used this build for farming hundreds and hundreds of hours in Season 25. Now let's look at the gear and how everything works, shall we? So of course the 6-piece straight away. From the 2-piece, you get companion calls all companions to the side. So you get, of course, all the pets in here in the companion, which is basically just a good mix of damage and toughness increase. With the force, it basically says that sentries cast cluster when you do. And as well as also automatically cast your hatred spenders, i.e. your cluster arrow once in a while. What this means is you want to be firing as much as you can. Now your sentries will fire automatically once in a while, but it's very important that you squeeze out as many attacks as possible to really maximize your damage. This means that while you are moving, you want to do what is called stutter stepping. If you see my mouse cursor here moving, is because I'm stutter stepping. I'm using my mouse wheel to scroll up and down. If you go into options, you go to key bindings, you find force move. You can either bind this to mouse wheel up and down, or you can use spacebar. Try both and see what works for you. But basically, force moving allows you to move and fire in between the movement. So as you can see here, I'm moving and shooting in between. This allows me to get my maximum amount of attacks out per second that my build allows, and also allows me to move meanwhile. Now it might not seem that I'm doing that much, it might not seem that I'm moving that much, but in grand scheme of a DR or doing 100 Great Rifts, you will gain so much time and so much damage by doing this. And your 6-piece makes it so your primary skills, which is basically Cluster Arrow and sentries, deal 12,000 increased damage per sentry active. So you have a double dipping here. So basically you get 12,000 per sentry out on your Cluster Arrow, and your sentries also deal that extra damage. Which is why it's very important that when you enter a new rift, let's say you enter a new door, you immediately want to put down some sentries just to get the cooldown rolling. You want to get the number of sentries here up to 5 as soon as possible, which is also why we stack a lot of cooldown reduction. But basically for me, whenever I enter a Great Rift, I immediately put down at least 2 sentries, maybe even 3, just to get the cooldown rolling and just to have some sentries out. And these first 3 initial sentries will also deal a good amount of damage, but it is very important that you get the 5 down as soon as possible, and then you can start doing all your damage. For the weapon, using the Yang's Recurve, do not worry about this secondary at all. It is only for multi-shot. It does nothing for you. So you could even find an ancient Yang's, but a 150 secondary, it would do nothing. The only thing we're after here is the resource cost reduction, so do not worry about the secondary at all. So in terms of the stat here, the ideal stat is of course resource cost reduction, fairly high. It can roll between 40 and 50. As long as you get it 45 or higher, you're pretty much good to go. And after that, you of course want 10% damage, cooldown reduction. And you can see on my here, I have area damage. It's not very that useful for speed farming. So ideally, this area damage here would be attack speed. But the most important stats are cooldown reduction and 10% damage. Now on the quiver, the other hand, the secondary is very, very important. You need to get the secondary as high as you can. I would say anything above 190 is not very good, and you want to get a new one. And you also need one with a high sentry damage increased into damage skill. So you need a high secondary, and you need a high sentry damage increase. Then after that, you of course want attack speed, crit chance, cooldown reduction. The resource cost I have here is nice, but it could be basically area damage or any other stat. It doesn't matter too much. As long as you have all the other stats, you are good to go. But you're probably going to be gambling for this item your entire season, because you need a high secondary and you need high sentry damage and all the other stats as well. So unless you get a primal, you're pretty much going to be looking for this all season long. For the wings, we're using focus and restraint, and ideally here you want damage, crit damage, and crit chance. If you're early season, you could also use something like dexterity or attack speed, so something like the restraint here. but you ideally want damage, crit, crit. For the gloves, you want dexterity, you want crit damage, crit chance, and cooldown reduction. For the shoulders, these are difficult as well. You want either a trifecta or a quadfecta. In terms of importance, you of course want the sentry damage high. Get this as close to 15 as possible. You will also then want resource cost reduction and cooldown reduction. Now for this build, you don't necessarily need the 20% area damage like I have here. You could just play with a trifecta, i.e. you also had dexterity instead of the area damage here. That would be completely fine. For the helmet, you want cluster area damage, you want critical hit chance and dexterity. And of course, we're also socketing with a cooldown gem. For chest piece, get sentry damage, dexterity, vitality. For the belt, Captain Crimson's, get dexterity, vitality, all resistance, and % life. For the pants, get dexterity, vitality, all resistance. On the boots, get cluster area damage, dexterity, all resistance, vitality. On Squid's amulet, get cold damage, critical hit chance, and critical hit damage. For the bracers, Wraps of Cloudy, get a high secondary, get 47, 48 or higher. And after that, you want cold skill increased damage, critical hit chance, dexterity, and vitality. And for legendary gems, using Sage Stone of Vengeance, using Bane the Trapped, and then also for the last Enforcer. These 3 gems here will give you a ton of damage. For the cube, Manticore, reduce the hatred cost of cluster by 50 and increase damage by 300. So a secret for massive toughness increase. This, along with Wraps of Cloud, is really good, just sustained all around toughness that you have all the time. And of course also the Ring of Rangunder to allow you to have 5-piece Marauder, 2-piece Captain Crimson's, and gain the full effect of both sets. For the skills, Erase the 5 focus to proc your Wraps of Cloudy and your focus restraint. Playstyle Maelstrom for your main damage, of course. Sentry Polar Station. Make sure to try and put these on the enemies you're trying to kill to get them a slow effect, so you also proc your Bane the Trapped. Companion Wolf Companion, you can basically spam this all the time. Vault Tumble to get around the map and look for elites. And Vengeance Star Cut for a massive toughness increase. For the passive Tactical Advantage to get around the map quicker. This combined with our Vault Tumble is amazing for movement speed and getting around the map, and allows us to clear the rift in about 2 minutes. Custom Engineering, of course, to get more sentries out. Ballistics to increase the damage of the rockets that we of course are spawning with the cluster arrow Maelstrom. As you can see here, we fire 3 rockets at each enemy nearby when we are shooting this, so this increases the damage of it by a lot. And then Ambush, of course, for a massive damage increase to them targets when they are high health. Now to follow and use the relics to gain access to our skills. That's because we're using the Enforcer, so your pets take 90% less damage, and this applies to your follower. So basically you're able to do high gratives and your follower will still stay alive. And of course, make sure you have 25,000 main stats, so intelligence for the enchanters here. So for instance, crafting intelligence gear on a class that use intelligence, or you can also do what I do and just simply augment some of it. This is really nice as it allows you to get 10% damage from amplification, 10% cooldown reduction from the harmony, of course also a lot of attack speed, and then also of course cheat death. Besides that, of course, have a flavor of time to increase the duration of the pylons, and nemesis braces to spawn elites when pylons, and then of course also an oculus ring with 85% in secondary, so you get these rings you can stand in for more damage. Besides that, what I like to do is of course having 2 pieces of sage and 2 pieces of canes, and then a ring of Rangunder. Now, of course, this won't apply to you if you're doing gradives, but I just like having these all around because I keep forgetting to swap between T16s and gradives whenever I swap my build, as the follower is not a link to your armory. So I usually just have this on all the time. If I'm doing T16s or gradives or pushing, just have this on all the time. It doesn't make a big difference all around. But you can, of course, also put on a Creech Flame instead of the Ring of Rangunder if you are doing gradives or pushing, as it might allow you to get a bit more resource. And of course, also try and make your follower as tanky as possible. Give it a good amount of vitality, dexterity, armor and all that. Give it a ribbon gem so it's get life per hit. Because if your follower dies and you click a pylon without your flavor of time or nemesis up, that is bad news. Also make sure to check out my season 26 playlist here, as it will contain the best builds for season 26 for farming, pushing, Equine Nightmare. Basically anything that you might find interesting or useful will be linked in that playlist there. So see you there. Peace out, everyone.